The opinions of J. Michael McCoy and his guests are not necessarily the opinions of KPOG, any particular religious denomination, or any other theological institution. Thanks for listening to Mac's World Live, Living Free Through Forgiveness, live on KPOG and webcast1live.com.
All right, good afternoon. It's 1 o'clock, and this is the 10th day of the 5th month of the Lord's year of 2021. I'm J. Michael McCoy, and welcome to the Monday edition of Mac's World Live, Living Free Through Forgiveness. Happy Mother's Day to you all. I am sure that you were able to honor your mother in any way that's possible. Hey, Gregory, how are you? Some had to honor their mother in a remembrance because their mother has passed on. Hey, Gail. Some, like myself, had to do it from afar, like really afar, like 1,700 miles afar. But thanks to today's ingenuity in electronics and the internet and all those things, it was like I was there with her all the time. And so I wish you, Mom, a happy birthday. Happy Mother's Day. Thanks for choosing me as your son. And thanks for sticking up for me for the last 62 plus years. My mom and dad have been together since they were in high school. My father will be 91 on the 5th of June, and my mother will be 91 in November. And so I honor them. I look forward to Father's Day coming and sending a letter to my dad, which I do every year, to tell him the things that I've learned from him, the things that he taught me, mostly through osmosis, i.e. watching him, just being around him, hanging around his business a lot. And he's such a humble man. I don't know if I've ever met a more humble man than my dad. I mean, he just doesn't take credit for anything. He doesn't speak ill of people, even when they certainly deserve it. He's just always just the best guy in the room. Gosh, I wish I was half the man he was and half the father he was. He is a great dad. All right, excuse me. We're going to continue our journey on ways to find forgiveness, living free through forgiveness. And we've completed just part of the exercise that I have before me. I am following a book called Bruce Wilkinson. He's a New York Times #1 best-selling author and teacher, and it's called 70 times 7, Finding Peace by Forgiving Others and Yourself. And this was a class that I took. It was a 4-day class, 4 different capsules, DVDs, and a workbook. And I took this class, I don't know, probably 8 years ago. And it was very evident to me at the time that I was being called by Christ to be a messenger to others about forgiveness. I want to talk a little bit today about Christ's 5 requirements for lasting forgiveness. And the only reason I use the word requirements is because that's what's used in the pamphlet. I don't like that term. I don't think of Jesus as someone who has requirements. I know he says that if you love me, you'll serve me and follow my commandments. But I've never heard until now that Jesus has requirements for lasting forgiveness. And the more that I study this book and the more I talk to people, the more I realize how little I know about forgiving. I want to share with you a story, if I can, just for a moment. there's a listener out there, and they know who they are. And I, when I get to meet a listener, I try to be as genuine as possible, and genuinely learn to care for them. They've reached out to me, and that's the most important thing in my life, is to be evident and present for those that God sends to walk beside. And this individual, after listening to the last couple of weeks of the shows, said, well, I think I'm going to need some help forgiving some people. And I'm not going to go into any depths of it, but I want you to know that they're working very hard. And mainly the hard work is being done between the ears and 8 inches down into the heart. And that's really where forgiveness comes from. Forgiveness is anything but easy. I hate to put a token amount on it, but I think forgiveness, at least for me, I can only speak for myself, has been the hardest thing for me to learn. But as I've learned in the past few years, you can't give something away if you don't have it. And for 50 years or more of my life, I didn't have forgiveness. Not proud of that. It's just part of my story. I used to say I think my forgiver was broken. I just didn't see why anything I would ever say or do would be offensive so much that I would have to ask for forgiveness. Now, I know there was hundreds of cases probably of where I treated someone poorly, or felt that I was treated poorly, and then in return, kind of the opposite of the golden rule. I used to think that the golden rule was do unto others as they do unto you, which, of course, that's not what it says. It's do unto others as you wish they would do unto you. And I never got that right for many years. I would look at how someone was treating me, and the leopard's stripes never change, and I would treat them the way they treated me. It made complete, perfect sense to me, but it was so far from the will of God that I don't know how he dealt with me. But that's kind of the whole point of forgiveness. If God can forgive me for some of the outlandish statements I've made, some of the mistakes I've made, some really life-changing mistakes. And I want God's forgiveness to be the same for me. And that's hard. When this gentleman and I were sitting down and talking, it became obvious that there is a depth of resentment inside of him for some family members. And yes, I can absolutely relate. I remember after working for years and years and years with therapists, trying to figure out why I was so broken, that we got to the what do you want to call it? To ground zero. Ground zero. I mean ground zero of why I had felt the way about my parents that I had felt for so long. And when I realized it, one of the realizations that came with that discovery was the fact that there was nothing malicious about it on their part. They just didn't understand how I felt. And I probably did a very poor job of explaining to them over and over and over about how they made me feel or how I felt when they did some of the things that they did. And they weren't anything other than what regular parents do, what regular children do. But the moment that I figured this out, I wanted to run out. Literally, I remember sitting in the therapist's office. I wanted to run out and sit down and hug my mom and dad and cry in their arms and say, I'm so sorry. I've been such a son of a gun these past, 30, 40 years, and please forgive me. And my therapist gave me one of the most important answers I've ever had to that concept. He said, you have no idea what they will be forgiving you for. Leave it alone. It's enough that you understand you're wrong. And the way that you can honor them in the future is stop treating them poorly and treat them actually as the commandments tell us to do. Honor thy mother and father. And for the last 11 years, I've had the greatest relationship with my parents. And it would not have been possible without two things. One, finding that ground zero of where that resentment I had began. And it was just a teeny little boy resentment. I was 6 years old when this resentment was placed in my lap. And I created the resentment. They didn't. See, I always wanted to blame them, but they didn't do anything wrong. They just didn't do it the way I thought it should be done. And yes, even at age 6, I had somewhat of a pretty strong will. The second most important thing I learned was the love of Jesus can take the place of any resentment you might have. I've said it many times, many times, that Jesus did not die on that cross so we could forgive the guy that pulled out in front of us on 235, or the neighbor whose garbage fell over and it all ran across into my lawn, blew into my lawn, or a business person who doesn't treat me genuinely and authentically and, mostly important, honestly. Those are all important, don't get me wrong. But Jesus died for the big stuff. Jesus said, I didn't, hold on, I don't want to quote this. I'm not quoting him, but one of the things he tried to teach us was don't major in the minors. Don't get all worked up and upset and all that for the things that are just minor in your life, insignificant. One of the things that Christ has taught me is you use so much time, Mac, with resentments and harboring ill will against somebody. And I wish God once kind of made me feel as if I could take all that time that I had used for negativity in my life and put it towards a relationship with him. Oh my, think how far we would be today than we are. And don't get me wrong, I'm very thankful for the relationship that I have with Jesus. I was talking to one of the pastors this weekend, and I told him that, no matter how much I struggle, no matter how much I can't get things done the way I'd like to get them done, I never doubt God or Christ or the Holy Spirit. I just don't. I know that doesn't make any sense, but I've never shaken my hand at God or my fist at God and said, listen, you got to do this for me because I'm dying here. I always believed in him. Always knew he was a part of my life. But most importantly, I always knew that he was important, or I was important to him. I always tell people, if you don't believe in God, that's okay. He believes in you. And that can't change. And as this person and I talked yesterday, we didn't talk about the wrongs that needed to be righted. We didn't talk about the things that created the convictions of those resentments. We talked about Jesus. We talked about his love. We talked about his sacrifice on that cross with the sole purpose in forgiving us of our sins. The Bible verses and the story about the talents. 10 talents are so true in so many ways. You know, we don't treat those people that humbly exist in our lives half as good as we should. And the people that don't deserve the time of day from us, well, the Lord has us pursuing them, trying to come beside them, trying to, in some way, hope that they see Christ in us. They see Christ abiding in us and us abiding in him. I don't know how this exercise or this journey for this person to forgive is going to take, but I'll tell you, I'm not giving up. I'm not going to give up, because this is what God sent me here to do. He sent me to help people live free through forgiveness. That is not a title that I took out of a book or out of the Bible verse somewhere. That is just something that came out of the writing of my second book, Living Free Through Forgiveness, because the stories in that book, there are probably 17 stories about people in my life. Because God has granted me this window into my pain of resentments and my inability to forgive, because he's allowed me to see that. He's given me a gift that I want to pass on to you. He didn't give me this gift of living free through forgiveness for me to hold it up or put it in a crystal ball or put it in my desk drawer at home or anything else. He gave it to me so I can share it with you. And so I look forward to walking with this person for as long as he'll let me, in helping him find the peace, P-E-A-C-E, the peace of love and understanding that Jesus brings to our lives. And that freedom comes from forgiveness. Frank is here today, and I want to tell him I have meatless lasagna in the refrigerator for you. I never found out. Did you like mushrooms? Okay, well, it's a mushroom-based meatless lasagna. So I think you should go get some and heat it up and then come tell me how good it is. All right, so Frank totally depends on my cooking. Does anybody else cook for you?
Me?
Yeah, well, you don't count.
Me? I had to make Mother's Day dinner for my mom.
What'd you make?
Homemade potato salad, meatloaf out of those Beyond Burger patties,
Oh yeah,
and
plant-based.
and some baked beans.
How was the beef pat, or how were the patties that were made out of plants?
They were good.
Really?
I put some crackers and an egg and some meatloaf seasoning in it, and
Yeah.
formed it, and
Just tasted like meatloaf.
put ketchup on top and baked it. I don't like just runny ketchup. I like baked on ketchup.
Yes, I understand.
And, so it's gummy and coagulated. And I gave her at Hy-Vee, the other night, I got a single cookie for $1.50. It had a nice rose on it and some frosting, and it said Mom on it. And I said, that's your cookie. Don't eat that flour because it's probably got too much sugar in it. And I gave her some milk.
Oh,
Gave her some almond milk so she could dip the cookie and it'd be soft for her to eat.
and she loved it.
Yes.
Okay, well, good. Well, go get some of my meatless lasagna, mushroom-based, and see if you like that. All right, so now I got to get my mind back on track here.
Yeah, well, before it gets on track, let me try to make a point I made the other day.
Well, maybe I don't want you to.
Okay. Well, you'll get it anyway.
See how it works around here, folks? Power of God sometimes is the power of Frank.
Forgiveness is the work of the Spirit alone. You can't forgive anybody. It's not possible in your human nature to forgive anyone. So what you do is when you submit over the Spirit, one of the very first fruits he grows on your tree is love. Then when you're filled with love, then he starts prompting you to forgive people, and all you got to do is get out of his way. He'll do the forgiving, he'll do the hard work, but you've got to do this little thing called submission. Submit. And that's what's difficult. It's not the forgiveness part that's difficult. It's the submission to the Spirit part that's difficult.
Well, I would agree with you on that, although today's lesson is Christ's 5 requirements for lasting forgiveness. And I don't, as I said earlier on in the program, I don't like the word requirements. But who am I to try to edit Jesus? So I'll just tell you what he talks about here. Some things in our lives are meant to be temporary. Others are meant to be permanent. Forgiveness is one of those characteristics that God desires to be a permanent fixture in your heart. As we study the lesson this week here in Mac's World, we are going to reflect on Christ's 5 requirements that will help us make forgiveness a lasting part of our lives. Well, I couldn't have written that any better. That's beautiful. The key to fulfilling these 5 universal requirements is understanding how to break out of our heart prisons. So one of the things that we're getting from this study that we're doing here on the radio every day is we're getting new words and new phrases. In the first week, we got the phrase tormentors. That the fact that we cannot forgive someone or that we can't be forgiven takes us straight to the feet of the devil and we make him an idol. Now, I want you to understand what I just said. By keeping resentments and not forgiving others or forgiving ourselves, we make Satan an idol. Because that's that unforgiveness, that pain that this resentment causes, begins to be a part of who we are. And as I went through the process of learning how forgiveness works, and by the way, I started this 5 years ago, and I don't even know if I'm 10% into it yet. But I can tell you the things that God helped me work on changed my life, maybe saved it. Because I couldn't go on feeling the way I felt about certain people. I couldn't do it. It was changing who I was. It was changing my identity, and my identity should only be in one person, Jesus. We talked about this weekend. When people get lost, and I don't mean in the wilderness, but in the difficulty of relationships here on earth, we lose how Jesus sees us. And we begin to see ourselves. Now, hold on. I'm going to say something you don't like, but it's true. We begin to see ourselves through the devil's eyes. And I'm not one of those weirdo spiritual warfare guys, but I'm going to tell you right now that I believe in spiritual warfare. And if you believe in God, then you do too. If you think that this is a world that is only controlled, good and evil, by one God, by one man, by one creator, well, it's not right. We would not have sin if it wasn't for Satan. A battle that began so many eons ago between God and one of his top angels. Now, I don't know if I'll ever understand how this whole thing truly happened, because it's really not laid out in the Bible very clearly. But the story of God reaching out to his chosen people time and time and time and time and time again, giving his chosen people who became Gentiles. And I'm not going to get into this very deep here today, but pardon my frankness on this, but if you're Jewish, you messed up. He was your God, and you were his people. And he asked so very little of you. And yet you rebelled, and you rebelled, and you rebelled, and you rebelled because you wanted to be a God yourself. I know, because I wanted to be a God myself. Not a God as we think of in Jesus or our Creator, but a God in, I'm in charge of me, and nobody else is in charge of me. And I'll do it my way or it's the highway.
You ain't the boss of me. You ain't the boss of me.
Will you just calm down and eat your lasagna, please? Wow. I'm on a roll here, Frank. Just be nice to me. What was I talking about?
Forgiveness.
Oh.
Sin.
So the joke between Frank and I is always, so what's your show on today? Sin. I used to work with a preacher, and I'd always say, so what are you preaching on today? Jesus. And the fact of the matter is, it's true. We're always telling the story of God and you. You ever thought about that? That Old Testament? I wish we didn't call it old. I like to call it the previous testament. Because Jesus did change everything. But that doesn't mean that the God of our creation, the God that led the Israelites through the Red Sea, the God that brought peace among the earth by flooding it and keeping Noah and his family and those animals safe to start over again. Read the story of Noah. God is not happy with us. He's not happy with his creation. In fact, at one point, how would you like your Creator to say this about you? I wish I had never created you. What if your mom were to say that to you? Or your dad? Well, that's what God said to us in the days of Noah. I wish I never would have created you. You might have been the biggest mistake I ever did. And yet story after story after story after story in the Bible is about redemption. It is the good guy versus the bad guy. It is about living free living free through our Creator and the forgiveness that he brings to the table for us. If you don't know forgiveness in your own life, then ask God to reveal to you when A, someone forgave you, or B, you forgave someone. Because you may not have done it the way that we're talking about in this series. It may not have been knowledgeable to you that that's what was going on, that this person was forgiving you. You know, as I've studied and studied and studied this concept of forgiveness, that's one of the things that God has made very aware to me. How many people in my life forgave me when I didn't have any idea how I'd ever return the favor? Didn't even know they were forgiving me. The Bible are stories about forgiveness. When Abraham was told to take Isaac to the mountain and kill him, and God came, just, you can hear the music, da 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 da, and he takes the knife and he raises it high and he's about to shove it into his son's chest, and God says, "Stop. I don't want you to hurt Isaac. I just wanted to see if you'd listen to my needs and my wants for you. And they weren't to kill your son. They were for you to show me how much you love me." The stories throughout the Old Testament, the previous testaments, are amazing stories. On Sabbath, I listened to a pastor preach about the great moms of the Bible. And you know, there's one that is very, very rarely heard of. And I can give you a hint and see if you can guess it, but I don't know if you can. I have never heard this name as far as I know it. Even in seminary, we didn't study this. Yes, we read about it. It's talked about in Exodus 6, 20. It's talked about in Numbers 26, 59, chapter 26 and verse 59. But according to the Bible, the Pharaoh's daughter, who found the basket floating down the river with little baby Moses in it, the Pharaoh's daughter said, we must find the mother of this child because the child needs to be nourished. The child needs food. Just like in today's world, the mother's milk is the best thing for their child. And for whatever reason, we may decide that the mother's milk comes from someplace else other than the mother, and that's okay. But it still talks about how Moses needed to be fed by his mother. You know her name? Have you ever heard of her before? Her name, Jochebed. Jochebed. And she's only mentioned a couple of times in the Bible. But yet she did something that changed the world. First of all, she gave up her male child because the Pharaoh had demanded every male child be killed. Because the male child that you had or you just had could have been the Messiah that came to replace the Pharaoh, and he wasn't going to have any part of that. So Jochebed, knowing that if she kept Moses, he probably would lose his life, did the most heroic thing any mother can do and set the baby free, away from the trouble, away from the harm, away from the pain, away from the sin. And you talk about Jesus showing up in a story. Moses is floating down the river in a basket, and who should find him but the Pharaoh's daughter? And when the daughter went to Pharaoh and said, can I keep this child? The Hebrew woman living in slavery in Egypt. She was the daughter of a Levite, and she married a Ham. Why did God put Moses in the hands of the enemy, only to find out that the mother must return to save Moses' life? Can I give you a hint? It starts with the letter F. Forgiveness. See, Jochebed needed to forgive herself for setting her child free, for discarding him in the river. Pharaoh's daughter needed to be forgiven for her father's horribleness. I don't even know if that's a word. But I don't know if she could be proud of her father or not, but obviously if she was willing to take this baby out of the river and go show it to her father and say, I'm going to raise this child, but I need the mother to feed her. And Pharaoh, even though he had explained, there you go, that these male children must die. According to Jewish legend, Moses' mother eventually was burned in the tomb of Tiberias. Yes, many people really loved her and know what she did. But at the time she was looked at as Jesus was looked at by so many Jews. not a good person, broke the law, broke Pharaoh's law. These are stories of forgiveness. These are stories that teach us how God forgives us and how he loves us. Can't you just feel the heart of Jochebed when she gets the message from the Pharaoh's daughter that she's being called to serve the Pharaoh by saving her child's life? Now, you couldn't write that in a Rod Sterling show. That was incredible, but it's true. That's how God works, and we don't see it. We just don't see it. So here's the question. What's the first thing Jesus requires for lasting forgiveness? We've been talking about these places that we've learned about. We talked about the torturer, the tormentor, the one who lives rent-free in between our ears, the one that creates this abominable resentment that we carry around like a 9,000 billion ton rock. But Jesus teaches us how to forgive. We're now learning about heart prisons. And a heart prison is an inner dungeon where we lock up the people we haven't forgiven. Inside of this heart prison are individual cells for those in our heart prison. You're not in a heart prison. You've put someone in your heart prison. Unfortunately, when we have someone in our heart prison, we also put up the walls around our hearts to protect us from ever being hurt again. Ultimately, whenever we put someone in prison, we're also locked up ourselves as well. And nobody does it but you. You do it. That's why I always tell you that the act of forgiving someone else might be one of the most selfish things you've ever done. But the selfishness is also the protection. And as Frank said earlier, it is the surrender to the ultimate forgiver and say, I can't do this, Jesus. I'm going to give it to you. And we're going to watch the miracles you create. Ultimately, whenever we put anyone in prison, we're also locked up as well. Therefore, to free our hearts and empty all our prison cells, Christ has 5 requirements that will guide you to fulfill your quest to find lasting forgiveness. I don't think Jesus would give you the top 5 lists of things that he required. I think he would tell us the story in a fable. He would maybe tell us the story of Jochebed and how she came to the rescue of her son who she had let go. You know, the old 70s thing, if you love something, set it free. If it comes back to you, it's yours. If it doesn't, it never was. This is a story of forgiveness. This is a story of Moses' mother being called to save her child when she was the one that put him in harm's way. The first thing that Jesus requires to find that lasting forgiveness is you have to open your heart. In Revelation 18:20, John writes, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in to him and dine with him, and he with me. On one occasion, Jesus was seeking to have deep communion with a group of people that he loved. But he was prevented from doing so because the doors of their hearts had slammed shut. To gain entrance, the Savior asked them to open the door of their hearts. This loving request from Jesus reveals the same concept in Matthew 18, when Jesus reveals we must forgive from our hearts. You know, each of our hearts has a door that can remain tightly shut or swung wide open. Our struggle at times is knowing when to securely fasten the lock on the door and when to turn the knob and open it. Now, isn't that an incredible statement? Two easy things, shutting the door or opening it. Shutting our heart or opening it up. And yet it's the thing that will lead to the worst of the worst, a heart prison for someone. And remember, they may be in your heart prison, but you're the one in jail. You're the one suffering. You're the one waking every day thinking about that person and that resentment and that wrongdoing, rather than spending time having the Lord speak to you and pray for you in what he'd like you to accomplish that day, the people he'd like you to help. Those people who are in a heart prison, the brokenhearted, the ones that Jesus came to save, to heal the brokenhearted and set the captives free. But we don't do it. What gives us the right? What gives me the right to shut my door on Jesus? I mean, man, there was a day 10, 11, 12 years ago I could have made a list. I'll tell you why I shut the door on Jesus, blah, 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 blah. But now, when you learn to open that door, just as Jesus preached in Matthew, he will come in and dine with you, and you with him. Breaking bread, communion. Each of our hearts has a door that can remain tightly shut or swung wide open. Our struggle at times is knowing when we securely fasten the door and when to turn the knob and open it. Preparing our hearts to forgive is an important step that requires us to open the door of our hearts. Why? Well, because we were wounded in our hearts, and therefore true forgiveness must occur from the heart. You say, well, how do I do that? Well, I don't know for sure how you should do it. I did it through writing. I wrote the story. I wrote God's and my story from the time I was born till the time I turned 60. And I opened the door each time and apologized and forgave and asked for forgiveness, so Jesus could give me the gift of living free through forgiveness. I did it by writing letters to myself, to my 6-year-old self, when I started this horrible resentment against my parents. Wrote a letter to myself in my late teens and early 20s, getting married way too young, and for all the wrong reasons, and showing that young man the mistake that he made. Not to point out and point fingers, so that young man would understand what he needed to forgive and who he needed to forgive, not who he needed to blame. See, blame creates the heart prison. Shame creates the heart prison, the torment. Forgiveness, that creates peace, everlasting, loving, God's peace. Because we were wounded in our hearts, and therefore true forgiveness must occur in our hearts. If we attempt to forgive someone or ourselves from our head or our emotions, we're going to fall down. Boom, boom, out go the lights. We're not going to do very well. Our heart is the only place we were wounded, and from the heart is where we are to forgive. In order for us to forgive as Jesus commands, we must open the door of our hearts. A closed heart keeps unforgiveness locked in. I'm going to say that again. A closed heart keeps unforgiveness locked in. Not locked out, locked in. And forgiveness ends up being locked out. Simply stated, forgiveness can only begin when our hearts are open. Our hearts are open to being teachable, to stand out naked with all my blemishes, with all my sins, with all my character defects, and ask Jesus to come and hold me. Wrap your arms around me, Jesus. I hate this feeling. I know that I will only be forgiven by you as I forgive others. But man, I never did what I'm being accused of doing to somebody else. And God just shakes his head and says, well, yeah, you did. Do you remember that time? Do you remember that tantrum? You remember the law you broke, the heart you broke? The people who you put in your heart prisons and locked the key and threw it away because you were never, ever, ever, ever going to forgive them. Ever. It's easy to not forgive. It's like opening a Cracker Jacks box and finding the toy. When you open the box of forgiveness, you're opening your heart to Jesus, to ask him to help you forgive. At times, I know you know the pain we have suffered at our offenders' hands renders us powerless to open the door. That's not true. We always have the ability to open the door of our heart anytime we choose. Let's push pause. I want to read that again. We always have the ability to open the door of our hearts any time we choose. It's up to us, in other words. There's nothing holding you back from opening your heart except you. You got some skin in the game here, cowboy. You gotta buck up. You gotta be a man. You gotta be a woman. You gotta be a mother. You gotta be a daughter. You gotta be a sister. You gotta be a wife. And do what's right in the eyes of Jesus, not the right of your closed heart. If our hearts are closed, we can choose to open them right now, and that would be a great thing to do, because someone you love is standing at the door asking you to open up and forgive. His name is Jesus. So here's the question I ask you as we land this plane today. Is the door of your heart open? If it's not, when will you open it? And if you need motivated, remember those words that Jesus taught the disciples. Forgive us our trespasses, as we, O God, forgive those who trespass against us. God, I want you to take a look at my example of forgiveness, and I want that from you. Boy, that's a hairy problem to ask God, because he'll show you. He'll show you how unforgiveness in your life, in the prisons, in the hearts, the captives, the shut doors. He'll show you what it could be like if you don't start forgiving others the way he forgives you. There's a lot of things that people say Jesus wants you to be or say or not do, etc., when you abide in him. And most of that, I will honestly tell you, is just stinking religion. Cross yourself. Take communion. Don't take communion. Wash feet. Don't wash feet. Take a covenant with God to never, ever, ever, or always, always, always do this or that. Making deals with God. God, if you get me out of this, I promise I'll be good. How many of those have you broken? Mine are many. See, Jesus wants to know that he can abide in you, that there's room for him, that there's room in your heart for love, unconditional love, and, most importantly, a love of forgiveness. Because when you finally open that prison door, open your heart, and truly, truly, as God would want you to do, and as you would want God to do to you, forgive you in a manner that honors him. Because he's the one knocking at your door. Amen? Amen. So that's the first requirement for lasting forgiveness, to open your heart. Do you know what the next 4 are? No, I'll tell you. Right here at this Bat Cave, same Bat channel, same Bat place, 24 hours from right now. Remember one thing. You can do it. You can set the captives free. Don't be a captive anymore. Jesus has taught us how to open the door. Now, darn it, open it. Get your pride out of the way. Get yourself out of the way of what God wants to do in your life. You say, well, he never talks to me. I don't know what he wants me to do. He never shows up, never answers my prayers. Well, yes, he does. Just maybe not the way you want them done. But the fact that he's listening to your prayers, the fact that he loves you so much that he's willing to stand by you even with a locked heart prison, even with hatred in your heart. Where does hate come from? It doesn't come from God. Guilt and shame doesn't come from God. Forgiveness comes from God. And it's there for you. You just have to knock on the door and go on in. I'm J. Michael McCoy. If I have not told you lately, I love my job. And quite frankly, I don't think I could do it without you. And I'm not going to try. Right here at 102.9 FM KPOG and webcast1live.com. Talk to you tomorrow.
Heaven can now be heard. It came